received notice of award from the Hinckley Center to conduct our year two study. And year two is just basically kind of looking at the feasibility and more of the economics behind a full-scale seaweed composting system. So as Dr. Solos mentioned before, and as Mark Almay can give you a little bit more background, the city of Fort Lauderdale has been composting, has their own composting operations for about 14 years. So everything's done in-house in terms of collecting the sargassum off the beach and moving it to Snyder Park, which is where their composting facility is located. There hasn't been an official economic analysis done behind their operations. So we're interested in seeing what really goes behind this operating such a facility for seaweed. So with that objective, we kind of outlined two different phases. We have the economic analysis phase, which will include conducting an economic analysis and looking behind all of the day-to-day logistics that goes into operating such a facility. And we also want to look at substitute products and is there something out there in the market currently that can be compared to seaweed compost that is produced. And for phase two is very similar to what we've been doing in for year one. It's just evaluating the compost pile. So it's collecting different samples from their compost pile and analyzing it for the bacteria and as well as for the nutrients to see what the quality of the compost is like. So for the economic analysis for phase one, this effort will be led by Dr. Blair. And this, again, the objective for the economic analysis is just kind of giving us an idea of what the city of Fort Lauderdale is saving versus what they're spending. And for this phase, we want to conduct interviews with the operators out of the city of Fort Lauderdale and other individuals who may manage seaweed at beach environments and kind of get an idea of what goes behind such a effort in terms of seaweed management. In order to do this, we have to submit paperwork through the IRB, and we're currently under reviewment for that. But as you can see for the two tables here, this is just basically like a preliminary breakdown of the items that are used in operation versus what the city kind of saves on. But a more in-depth analysis will be conducted for year two. And as I've mentioned, we also want to look at, is there anything out there in the market currently that we can compare our seaweed compost to? So under the advisement of Dr. Blair, we have an enterprise budget that will be conducted and kind of outlined, as well as a market analysis. And Dr. Blair, do you want to say a few words in terms of our approach for phase one?
Yeah, just really quick. So what AFIFA shows us some work that we usually do in crops and tropical crops. So it's just basically looking at what it costs to run an enterprise. So the breakdown in each of the costs, which we do try to do very user-friendly, and so that others that want to replicate this effort can see what were the costs and of the areas of producing it. So we usually use crops, and here's an example of a budget we would do in avocados that we recently done. And then the second part of the market analysis is, okay, so seeing how cost effective this is, what are the opportunities to sell this and use it if it indeed meets the requirements for nutrients and so on, in comparable products that are sold to homeowners or to growers or others that would be interested in using compost. So seeing if there could be an economic benefit as well from this product.
Thank you, Dr. Blair. And then again, as I mentioned, part of this process is kind of conducting interviews with people who manage beaches, who are really involved in the management of sargassum on the beach. So these are just some example questions that we would ask them. But it's just the general gist of these questions is getting an idea of how in these different municipalities and cities, how is the sargassum dealt with? What do they do? How are they hauling it off? Are they taking it to a different place in their city? Just kind of getting an idea of the different ways that the sargassum or seaweed is managed at the beach. Because again, even each city manages their seaweed in a very different way. Some may take it to a landfill. City of Fort Lauderdale does their own in-house composting. So it's just to kind of get an idea of all the different ways that cities and municipalities deal with the sargassum that has influxed their beaches. So for phase two of year two, which is the evaluation of the compost pile, again, we'll conduct interviews and kind of examine the compost pile that they have and kind of assess the different ages of the different areas and ages of the compost pile. And let's say this is where fresh sargassum was brought in versus this area of the pile has been sitting for about a year. So kind of get the different ages in the locations of the pile, collect those samples, and then kind of test those samples over time, test those samples to see how the parameters have changed over time. So that's kind of the gist of what we want to do for phase 2 of this, of year 2 of funding. So in terms of the parameters that we want to test for, it's very similar to what we test for in our year 1 project, where again, just looking at the basic bulk physical and chemical parameters. We're going to be looking at the nutrients, the carbon to nitrogen ratios, and the phosphorus. And for the bacteria analysis, we're going to conduct it a little bit differently. Instead of using a culturable method, we are going to use the multiple tube fermentation method, which is used for Class A biosolids to monitor the fecal coliforms. And that way we're going to see what the levels of bacteria are like in the different samples that we collect.